Hi, Dr. Shapiro, Debra Shapiro.
Debra's fine.
I wish
Hi.
I had known you when I was a young 30, 40-year-old because I had so many menstrual problems. I was running for marathons, but I have to quit running because my breasts hurt so much. Everything hurt in my female body, and I just didn't know, and of course my doctor didn't know either. So this is why we need you to explain to everybody here what we need to do to stay safe from such horror, a horror show that I had. So Dr. Debra Shapiro is a women's health specialist. She's been doing it for 30 years, and she studied plant-based nutrition for the last 10 years. And her talk is how a plant-based OBGYN can change your life. Because women really do believe that you have to have acne, or it just comes with being a woman, or painful menstruation, or endometriosis, fibroids, female cancers, fertility issues, osteoporosis, heart disease, all of it. We just think it's a natural thing for us. So I think too, I'm not sure, but I think more women die of heart disease, don't they, than men? Yeah. Or is that true? I'm not sure. I read that somewhere. That might not be right.
But it is the number one cause of death for both women and men.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Neither.
So you can understand from her today how whole food plant-based diet can impact every stage of our lives, we women. Okay. And you're going to understand endocrine disrupting chemicals and how they are affecting your health, how to reduce your exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals such as pesticides, biocides, plastics, food contact materials, cosmetics, and others. She's certified in obstetrics and gynecology and lifestyle medicine too. She has a certification for plant-based nutrition, and she's certified as a health coach and lifestyle educator. Now, I think I meant to say she's certified in nutrition from T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutritional Studies, and she's a co-founder of a group called the Pregnancy Advantage, and she's a contributor to the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, improving women's health across a lifespan. With that, I'd like you to see there. Oh, there it is. Show that again. Show that again.
I can't really see it.
Right there.
It's a textbook. It's fine. I just contributed.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Debra, for being here, Dr. Shapiro.
Debra's fine. Should I share my screen?
Yes, please.
All right. You've enabled it. All right. You can see it again?
Yes.
Yeah, the big, will it work? Yes. Yay. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome. And thank you for that very kind introduction. I'm just as grateful to have met you and to be part of this and to be hearing these incredible speakers before me. They are amazing. I just love them. Today, I'll be talking about women's health issues specifically, but men also may find this information relatable, and whenever possible, I will also show how men's health can be positively affected by my recommendations. I will be considering the health of women during 3 time periods during their lives. Although these are pretty arbitrary, they will be useful for this discussion. Adolescence, which I'm going to define as approximately 12 to 20. Sorry.
I think the program is excellent.
Sorry.
Well, now you know why we shouldn't be eating fruit.
Oh, it won't go back. Yes. Sorry. 12 to 20. The adult, more commonly the childbearing years from 21 to 51, and the menopausal years from 52 on. Let's start with a very young woman, me, for example. I was 12 when I first got my period, it was summertime and going to the community pool was a daily event. I couldn't miss it. But it meant I needed to learn to use a tampon, and I couldn't do it. It's kind of funny for a budding gynecologist, right? This was my first introduction to a gynecological office and exam, and it worked out fine. A tampon was placed without difficulty, and I was returned to my usual activities and off to swim. Well, I think this doctor did her job. As I reminisce, I think it was a lost opportunity, as I spent years with horrific monthly menstrual pain and suffered extremely heavy and burdensome blood loss. So this would be a time which I would take to discuss a number of issues of importance to young women. If my patient's goal was only to get back to the pool ASAP, I would have made an additional appointment to discuss these important health issues. The reality for me is that I didn't see another provider until I was 17 and wanted birth control. So what are a few of the ways that a plant-based gynecologist could positively impact the life of an adolescent? Dysmenorrhea, painful menstruation, menorrhagia or heavy menstrual flow, irregular bleeding, acne, depression and anxiety, behavior issues, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, for example, issues related to gender identity, gender expression, and gender preference, birth control, sexually transmitted disease information, certainly weight management, disordered eating, cigarette, drugs, and alcohol use, and environmental toxin exposure through cosmetics and personal care products. So in the time that we have, I'd like to focus on just a few of these issues to highlight how a more whole plant food diet, as opposed to the very typical diet that most US kids eat today, could alter a young person's life in a very positive way and have far-reaching effects as well. I can use my own experience growing up as an example. My young life was complicated by acne, heavy, painful menses, disordered eating, and depression. And my diet growing up was full of eggs, cheese, tuna, fried chicken, pizza, milkshakes, and soda, processed cakes, and desserts. A pretty typical standard American diet during the 70s, and sadly, not too different today. Let's start with acne, which can be so disruptive to the self-esteem of a teen, and it affects the majority of young women. Severe acne as a teen was the reason my father became a dermatologist, and there were times that I was so paralyzed with self-consciousness about an inflamed acne lesion on my face that I would not be able to leave the house. Acne is triggered by hormones. It's also related to excess sebum, the oily substance in hair follicles. It's related to certain skin bacteria and inflammation, as well as growth factors like IGF-1 and mTOR. Interestingly, Laron syndrome is a form of congenital dwarfism, and is characterized by an IGF-1 deficiency. And these folks do not suffer from acne, and despite being more obese, they have much lower rates of type 2 diabetes and cancer. And also, folks on the remote island of Kitava near Papua New Guinea have no acne, and they eat no added salt or sugar or oils, mostly tubers, fruits, vegetables, and some fish. So what are the dietary factors related to acne? A diet high in sugary foods, meats, and refined carbohydrates leads to more acne as compared to a diet high in fruits and vegetables. Whey protein from dairy, which is high in the amino acid leucine, as well as saturated fat and trans fats, are also related to increased lesions via something called mTORC1, androgens, and other inflammatory pathways. All dairy was found in a meta-analysis to increase acne lesions. And here is an image from the Jewel study showing all dairy products increasing the odds of acne. So here you're looking at what we call a forest plot of data from multiple studies, all looking at the same thing, dairy and acne. And you can see that regardless of the source of the dairy, right? Low fat, skim milk, any milk, whole milk, cheese, yogurt, non-fat, they all increase the risk of acne because all the dots and the lines are all on the right side of this vertical no effect line. So my recommendations as a plant-based OBGYN, acne will be improved on a healthy, whole food, plant-based diet, reducing processed and sugary foods, dairy protein, reducing saturated fat, and increasing omega-3 fatty acids. You consider adding more omega-3 fatty acids. because they have an anti-inflammatory effect and seem to inhibit mTOR. The bioactive in green tea, a polyphenol called epigallocatechin gallate, EGCG, works in a similar way, especially when applied to lesions as an extract and maybe in a mask, right? I want to salute Dr. McDougall here, who famously cured 2 cases of very severe cystic acne in 2 young women using a very low-fat, whole food, plant-based diet, as well as oil-free skin products and cleansers. Changes were apparent after just 3 to 4 days, and complete reversal was seen in 6 weeks. Only someone had told me. Dysmenorrhea, painful menstruation. This is either primary, not due to any pelvic disease process, or secondary dysmenorrhea related to, let's say, endometriosis or fibroids or an infection, for example. The causes of primary dysmenorrhea are still unclear, but researchers believe that one of the most accepted explanations is increased synthesis of prostaglandins, of which types E2 and F2 alpha play a significant role in the development of ischemia and hypoxia, which means not getting enough oxygen to the smooth muscle fibers, resulting in dysrhythmic uterine contractions and decreased blood flow. This is no minor issue. 50% of women may suffer from severe cyclic menstrual pain, and many school and work days are lost due to painful periods. I've had employees miss a day of work per month simply due to severe menstrual pain. And this is why birth control pills and antiprostaglandin medications have been so popular to control the pain associated with dysmenorrhea. While it is perfectly reasonable to offer a young woman oral contraceptives to help with severe menstrual pain, as I was advised when I started my OBGYN residency, dietary changes have been shown to help significantly. For example, there was an over 4 times increased risk of moderate to severe primary dysmenorrhea in young women adhering to a snack pattern of unhealthy, high salt, fat, sugar, and caffeinated foods. And Neil Barnard was able to demonstrate a significant reduction in not only menstrual pain, but also premenstrual syndrome, bloating, headaches, breast pain in a unique crossover type study. This study was associated with an increase in sex hormone binding globulin, which reduces the activity of free estrogen. So in this study, had women start, half of the group was starting on a low-fat plant-based diet, another half was on their own diet, and then after 2 cycles, they switched, and you got to see the difference when people switched. Actually, one woman who was supposedly infertile and wasn't using any birth control because she didn't want them on birth control, actually came back and said, I've got good news and bad news, Dr. Barnard. I can't be in your study anymore because I'm pregnant. So she got pregnant after just 1 cycle on a whole food plant-based diet, and she had been told she was infertile. She went on to have a few more kids. So my own experience as a plant-based doc and a coach is that a diet free from dairy and high in whole plant foods resolved severe dysmenorrhea. Although studies on individual supplements are sparse, additional dietary recommendations might include increasing omega-3 fatty acids, increasing zinc, seeds such as pumpkin seeds prior to menses to decrease prostaglandins and inflammatory cytokines, decrease sugary drinks as well as caffeinated drinks, increase fiber to decrease circulating estrogen, increase calcium in fortified plant milks and low oxalate greens, increase vitamins B1 and B6 that are also found in fortified plant milks as well as whole grains. Young women may also suffer from irregular bleeding that occurs less than every 21 days or more than 45 days or lasts longer than 7 days. A conscientious gynecologist will do an appropriate workup to determine if there's a medical cause that can be treated, such as thyroid disease or platelet dysfunction or an infection. But often these symptoms, especially very infrequent bleeding, can be related to a common disorder called polycystic ovarian syndrome or PCOS. And PCOS can be reversed with a healthy plant-based diet. Although signs of PCOS can show up in very young women, I'm going to spend a lot more time talking about this common hormonal disorder a little bit later in the talk. Heavy bleeding is defined as soaking more than 7 pads or tampons per day. After a bleeding disorder or other anatomic cause has been ruled out, like fibroids, this may also be reduced on a plant-based diet, which is naturally lower in fat. Although human studies are lacking, studies at least in mouse models showed that heavier flow with more inflammation and slower endometrial repair leading to more blood loss, was seen when animals were fed a high-fat diet. As childhood obesity is now becoming such a major public health issue, it's important to remember that overweight and obese young women eating a high-fat diet, which is so typical of kids today, may also suffer from heavier menses. I know we've been talking about iron and some of the other, or there've been some questions about iron. And I just wanted to just make a nod, put a nod to this. There was a single case report of an iron deficient vegan who was temporarily blind due to retinal vein occlusion, but her sight returned after her iron levels increased. But all this to say, iron deficiency anemia is potentially life-threatening. So it's very important that women who are menstruating, especially ones who are having heavy periods, are aware of replenishing their iron stores through diet and supplements if needed. In general, though, studies of vegans do not show that vegans are getting any significantly less iron than meat eaters. Interesting. They're eating well. I mean, if you're just, Coke and chip kind of vegan, that's not going to be true. So you have to eat well. Plant foods that are high in iron include lentils, black beans and other legumes, spinach and other greens, fortified cereals, and blackstrap molasses. Adding a source of vitamin C or ascorbic acid will increase the absorption of iron, and cooking food in an iron skillet will also increase the iron in the food. Mood and psychological development during adolescence. There are so many challenges of adolescence. While there are physical changes, the emotional changes are often even more significant. This is a time when we're all starting to take control over our bodies, deciding what to eat and when and with whom. This is a time when eating disorders are often uncovered. Young people are often deciding how they feel about their bodies as they develop, and they can experience discomfort and even ambivalence about these changes. They have to negotiate relationships with peers, decide on gender expression, and may even be experimenting with their own gender preference. An open-minded gynecologist can reassure your young patients about what they're going through and let them know that your office would be a safe place for any questions to be brought. The role of the plant-based gynecologist should include a careful, detailed review of a teen's diet and age-appropriate information about the health benefits each patient might expect to see, including both short-term improvements, skin, weight, emotional state, as well as long-term benefits of improving the likelihood of a long and healthy life and avoiding many of the common debilitating chronic ailments. I just wanted to say that I remember very clearly being 17 and living with a boyfriend in San Francisco and being anorexic. And I went to a doctor and I asked him, what should I be eating? And he simply couldn't answer me. It really took another 35 years for me to figure this out. Whatever stresses and psychological issues a teen may be going through, having clear information about healthy eating, as well as other healthy habits, will always be invaluable. In fact, there's a lot of data supporting the use of more fruits and vegetables to improve mood. The mechanisms include the increased available tryptophan precursor for the brain neurotransmitter serotonin, decreased inflammation and oxidative stress from decreased exposure to endotoxins in meat, less pro-inflammatory arachidonic acid found in eggs, chicken, and fish. Many plant foods contain a natural MAO inhibiting action, thus mimicking another class of antidepressants called monoamine oxidase inhibitors. Connor et al., he's from Australia, showed that fruit and vegetable consumption positively predicted eudaimonic well-being. That's engagement, purpose, meaning, creativity, and curiosity. And he also published an interventional trial with young adults and just added 2 additional portions of fruit and vegetables a day over a 2-week period and showed significant positive psychological outcomes in the treatment group. Now, this other group of college students were just sort of given some information about the importance of fruits and vegetables, but in his group that was in the study group, they were actually handed 2 servings of fruit, 2 portions of fruits and vegetables, and they saw the benefit. And in 2020, there was a systematic review of 61 studies of diet and mental health, and the results were clear. Increasing produce intake will improve mental health. Now, these studies were on adults, but I see no reason to believe that a swap of an apple for a potato chip wouldn't have the same positive effect on adolescents. In another review paper looking at depression among children and young adolescents, the foods to avoid included sugar, deep fried food, processed junk, alcohol, nicotine, and stimulants like coffee and tea. This idea of looking at foods as an asset to create health is part of the definition of salutogenesis, creating health, which I'll be talking about more. Lastly, part of developing into a healthy adult in the 21st century is now navigating this incredibly polluted world. Beyond the expected air pollution, pesticides, and herbicides, we now have a class of chemicals that are called endocrine disruptors, either mimicking our own hormones or blocking them. These include very common everyday products such as plastics, the linings of cans, electronic receipts, and many types of personal care products. We don't really know yet how all endocrine disrupting chemicals affect the menstrual cycle, but research is ongoing. And you can just Google endocrine disrupting chemicals and find all kinds of interesting research on them. Some endocrine disrupting chemicals like parabens and BPA have estrogen-like effect, and some, such as phthalates, block testosterone. Phthalates, a common plasticizer as well as a fragrance additive, especially a metabolite of DEHP, is associated with larger fibroids. There are endocrine disrupting chemicals in hair and makeup products as well as feminine hygiene products that many women use, and we should all be educated on how to avoid these chemicals wherever possible. UCSF has a wonderful group called the Program on Reproductive Health and the Environment, PRE, with ongoing research and some helpful handouts and information sheets. And Mamavation.com. Mamavation has extensive reviews of personal care products as well as other household products to avoid exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals. You can also check on the environmentalworkinggroup.org, EWG.org. So we'll be talking more about these as we get into a discussion of pre-pregnancy preparedness. But since young women are consumers of makeup and hair products and other personal care products, including tampons and pads, a well-informed physician should make an effort to steer her patients away from toxic chemicals and toward more healthy options that thankfully do exist. In summary, for the plant-strong adolescent who is aware of food additives and environmental contaminants, the benefits may include maintaining a healthy weight, improving mood, decreasing acne and other skin conditions such as eczema, regular, less painful, less heavy menses, less bloating and constipation, less risk of endometriosis, fibroids, and PCOS, less risk of future chronic diseases, including but not limited to cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and autoimmune diseases. And many of these benefits are not gender specific and will improve the health span of everyone. And this is what I mean by salutogenesis, as opposed to always thinking about the pathogenesis of disease, which I think we've been spending some other time on, right? I am focused on the promotion of health, both physical and emotional. If you start early, the rewards will keep coming throughout your life. So now let's turn our attention to part 2 of my talk, adulthood. The next part of a woman's life, I am naming the reproductive years, but this is arbitrary, as we know that even an adolescent can conceive, and through assisted reproductive technology with donor eggs, elderly women can also bear children. I'm going to be talking about how a plant-based gynecologist can be of service to a woman roughly between the ages of 21 and 51. If you've been seeing a plant-based OBGYN as a teen, you are already set up for success in these years. This is a time that women develop a closer relationship with an OBGYN than one who might even help her deliver her child. Each visit to the gynecologist will be reinforcing all the healthiest diet and lifestyle habits that we know will best ensure a long and healthy life. I may use the pronouns for women, but I want to acknowledge that biological females may transition to male and yet still be capable of becoming pregnant and reproducing. Luckily, plant-based nutrition can help everyone, regardless of gender identity or expression. While cancer screening is integral to a woman's annual exam, I would argue that advising on diet and lifestyle is probably the most important aspect of the annual, quote, well woman exam. I'm not discounting the importance of regular pap smears and HPV testing to prevent cervical cancer by catching precancerous changes and even giving the HPV vaccine, which should be given earlier. Breast exams and careful pelvic exams to catch any abnormalities at an early stage. And colorectal cancer screening is now recommended at age 45, even if low risk. And breast cancer screening has recommendations supported by the American College of OBGYN, the American Cancer Society, and the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force. Individual risks and benefits of these screening modalities should be discussed with each patient. Even if one grew up in a household where healthy eating was the norm, when you leave home and you live with friends and you have stressful work and new communities of friends, it takes skill and commitment to remain on a healthy path. Most workplaces offer few low-fat, low-sodium options in their cafeterias. In some offices, candy and sweets are always available, probably most offices I've been in. There's little support for anyone trying to avoid salt, oil, and sugar in addition to animal products. Only 3% of Americans identify as vegans, and even fewer are whole food plant-based. So unless you work for a vegan organization, most likely your colleagues will not share your health-conscious choices, and you may succumb to peer pressure. Building on what you learned as an adolescent, eating a naturally low-fat, whole plant food diet will lower your risk of developing some of the most common ailments that gynecologists see daily. Things like PCOS, endometriosis, irritable bowel, ovarian cysts, painful breast cysts, and fibroids. While teens may just need to learn how to eat better so they feel and look healthier and happier, an adult can be told even more detailed explanations of why and how this way of eating will lead to a long-term health and vitality. I'm going to use PCOS as a perfect example of how one might start this conversation. PCOS is a very common disorder of hormonal imbalance. Instead of a cyclic and orderly feedback system involving parts of the brain and the ovaries, women with PCOS have hormone signaling dysfunction. It's very common. 6 to 10% of the general population of women suffer from PCOS. There's a genetic link. First-degree relatives are 20 to 40% higher risk. Women with PCOS need to have 2 out of 3 symptoms: irregular or absent bleeding, signs of androgen excess, acne, excess body hair, male pattern baldness, elevated testosterone levels, or multicystic ovaries on ultrasound. The precise origins of polycystic ovarian syndrome are still not well known, but inflammation as well as oxidative stress and increased body fatness do play a huge role. Even exposure to certain endocrine disrupting chemicals such as BPA in utero could increase the risk. So this is a good time in the talk to review something that I learned from the amazing registered dietitian Brenda Davis years ago about the 4 major drivers of chronic disease. PCOS is an excellent example of a condition affecting so many women where all of these may play a significant role and all can be helped with diet. What I learned was there are 4 major drivers of all chronic disease: inflammation, oxidative stress, dysbiosis, and lipotoxicity. When you have a good understanding of each of these and how diet can affect them, all the puzzle pieces start to fit together, and almost every chronic condition can be reduced or even eliminated. Inflammation is part of your body's immune system and an important response to cellular injury. It's not universally bad. In fact, we need inflammatory responses to keep us healthy and intact. One way to think about inflammation is like stress. Acute stress is often a good thing. You're able to run quickly from a fire or other threat because of your acute stress response, sending blood to your muscles and away from other less immediately useful organs. But chronic stress, like from a toxic work environment, negatively impacts the body and can be a cause of depression, anxiety, pain, and many other symptoms. In a similar way, the acute inflammatory response, say to a cut in the skin, is important, rushing blood and immune cells to the scene and removing bacteria and allowing the skin to heal. But chronic low-level inflammation, with its numerous inflammatory mediators with names like C-reactive protein, chemokines and cytokines like interleukin 6 or 18, or tumor necrosis factor alpha, they put us at risk of all major chronic diseases. It is believed that chronic inflammation is a major contributor to the development of PCOS. The common inflammatory marker, CRP, C-reactive protein, is higher in women with PCOS. And specifically, some inflammatory compounds called advanced glycation end products, or AGEs, are higher in the blood of patients with PCOS, and there are increased receptors for AGEs on the ovaries of PCOS patients. Advanced glycation end products are formed when protein or fat gets exposed to sugar. These are very unstable and reactive glycated molecules that are not only inflammatory, but also a source of oxidative stress, capable of damaging our own cells and organs. Advanced glycation end products are found in meat, especially if cooked at high temperature, and they are lowest in fruit and vegetables. Your own load of AGEs can be detected by fluorescence, either in your urine or even through your skin. Oxidative stress, another critical player in the development of chronic disease, including gynecologic conditions. Oxidative stress is the name given to the imbalance between the production of damaging oxygen radicals with an unstable complement of electrons that steal electrons from other molecules, causing a cascade of damaging chemicals, and the healing antioxidants, which are able to donate an electron to the unstable molecule. All metabolic processes that go on in our bodies every second create oxidative stress. However, additional free radicals can be formed when we're exposed to solar radiation from sunlight, air pollution, other environmental chemicals, and many common foods. We need to have enough of the buffering capacity of antioxidants to prevent pathology resulting from oxidative stress. And oxidative stress is a cause of chronic inflammation. A third mechanism for disease promotion is lipotoxicity. And again, I'm going through all of these at this time because they all play a role in conditions affecting women's health and men's health, as well as fertility for both men and women. And they're all rather interconnected, as you are seeing. Lipotoxicity refers to the damaging effects of an excess of free fatty acids. These are fats from your diet, released from your own adipose tissue or fat tissue. And these free fatty acids are a cause of oxidative stress. And they cause damage to cellular organelles, the cells themselves, and even organ dysfunction. A good example of lipotoxicity is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or when excess fat is even offloaded into the pancreas, destroying the insulin-producing islet cells, causing a need for additional insulin in diabetics. More interestingly, for women, excess fatty acids can be stored in the ovary, where they damage the granulosa cells that secrete female hormones and nourish the eggs. And this causes oxidative stress and inflammation and contributes to the development of PCOS. Lastly, we're going to discuss with our patients the role of the gut microbiome, the trillions of bacteria, viruses, fungi, and archaea that inhabit our large and small bowel. Dysbiosis, the fourth major driver of chronic illness, refers to an imbalance between health-promoting species and species that have been associated with more disease. What we eat affects this population, as do many other factors, including genetics, age, antibiotic exposure, environmental pollutants, chemicals such as pesticides and herbicides, as well as stress. We now know that there is a subset of the microbiome that is specifically involved with estrogen metabolism and recycling. The estrobolome. It works through secretion by certain bacteria of specific enzymes called beta-glucuronidases. And these enzymes metabolize steroid hormones, including estrogen, as well as certain endocrine disrupting chemicals that mimic hormones in the body, like BPA and BPS and DDT and PCBs and dioxins and phthalates and even pesticides like chlorpyrifos. And when there is dysbiosis, there could be an increase in beta-glucuronidases and an increase in recycled and circulating estrogens. The estrobolome is linked to many gynecological conditions, such as those fed by estrogen, like fibroids and endometriosis, as well as breast and uterine cancer. The best way to keep the microbiome and the estrobolome in balance and healthy is with a fiber-rich, plant-based diet. Meat and trans fats are definitely associated with the development of fibroids. And a diet rich in fruit and vegetables, especially green vegetables, is associated with a decreased risk. There's data linking the increase in fibroids that we see in African American women to a diet higher in meat and lower in vegetables. Endocrine disrupting chemicals in certain hair relaxers used primarily by Black women have also been suggested to raise the risk of fibroids. Putting it all together, consuming a diet centered around whole plant foods and reducing the exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals will reduce the risk of developing many of the common conditions that bring women to the gynecologist for specialized care, like PCOS, endometriosis, uterine fibroids, and painful breasts. Interestingly, bile acids from the accumulated excess cholesterol is concentrated in breast cyst fluid, and this is mutagenic, damaging DNA and increasing the risk of breast cancer. Eating more fiber lowers cholesterol and will decrease the time that stool accumulates in the bowel and that estrogen can be recycled. Even bacterial vaginosis, a common and annoying vaginal infection with a fishy odor, will be less likely when eating a varied plant-based diet. And many bladder infections are actually linked to bacteria from chicken. Some risk is passed on from your mother and even your grandmother and may not be shifted in your lifetime. But if you start early, you can definitely improve your risk of chronic disease and improve the health of future generations, as we will talk about next. Pre-pregnancy health optimization. During these middle years, many women and female to male transgendered persons may want to reproduce. And this is a particularly critical time for the diet, starting preconceptually. So I'd like to do just a quick review, because it isn't the main part of this talk, but a quick review of just some of the nutrients of concern as a woman prepares for pregnancy. And please, would refer you to Brenda Davis and Fasanto Molina's work, Becoming Vegan, a wonderful book, as they dedicate an entire chapter to this very time. Even if you're on a healthy plant-based diet, you may want to take a closer look at some micronutrients that are more critical before and during your pregnancy. So, for example, you can see in this table that young women, and we'll talk about B12. I know people had questions about this before, but for young people, vitamin B12, 1,000 micrograms twice weekly is fine, or 2,000 micrograms a week. Calcium stays the same also, calcium needs until you're much older, until you're menopausal. Iodine, though, however, those needs go up. And, that's not found, it's found in seafood, which we don't recommend, but you have to pay attention to this. And we definitely recommend that you load up on some of these things, or not load up in a huge way, but get enough preconceptually so that you'd be prepared from day one. Iron needs go up in pregnancy, but they go down when you're breastfeeding, unless you're recovering from a blood loss during pregnancy. Zinc goes up a little bit. Choline is an interesting nutrient. It's found in a lot of plant foods, but maybe not as much as you might need. And people who eat animal products get it from egg yolks, et cetera, and organ meats. So that's something to think about. Omega-3s, you might want some extra. And we recommend that from a plant-based source. Certainly not from fish oil. And folic acid is the heat stable form of folate. Now, this was the form that was tested and proven long ago to decrease the risk of a neural tube defect like spina bifida. So while a lot of people, we do worry about getting too much folic acid, and I don't want you to get too much folic acid, but I think a small amount is still recommended. I know a small amount is still recommended pre-pregnancy and during pregnancy, and I would still have to go along with that from the American College of OBGYN. Most prenatal vitamins will have at least the minimum. I mean, you don't want to get a prenatal vitamin that doesn't, for example, have 150 micrograms of iodine. But check the labels. It's imperative that you pay attention both to your diet and also to your supplements as the RDA shift, as you can see around pregnancy and breastfeeding. And also protein and fat requirements shift as well. For example, you might be on a very low-fat diet before pregnancy, but when you're pregnant, we recommend 20% of your calories from fat, not from oils, but from nuts and seeds and avocados, for example. And protein requirements definitely go up 50% in your second and third trimester. So the Pregnancy Advantage, I do have this coaching program. If anyone's interested in, you can look at pregnancyadvantage.net. The purpose of eating a plant-strong diet pre-pregnancy and removing exposure to as many chemicals as possible is to create an optimized uterine environment for a healthy embryo to develop. Endocrine disrupting chemicals will not only affect your child, but through epigenetics, they will affect the health of your grandchild as well. For example, If your grandmother was exposed to DDT, you are more at risk for breast cancer and other chronic conditions. A healthy weight during pregnancy with appropriate and not excessive weight gain and optimal nutrition will decrease the risk of pregnancy complications, such as preeclampsia and gestational diabetes and preterm birth, and decrease the chances of any adverse pregnancy outcome, like low birth weight, for example. Pregnancy gives us a kind of window into your own future health. For example, women who develop preeclampsia are more likely to develop cardiovascular disease later in life. And women who develop gestational diabetes are more likely to develop type 2 diabetes later on. Having these adverse pregnancy outcomes also affects the future health of your children. And this is another reason to optimize your pre-pregnancy health so that you can maintain a healthy diet during pregnancy, avoid complications, and avoid the increased risk of chronic diseases as you age. As a practicing obstetrician, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of having a healthy pregnancy and delivery. There can always be unforeseen complications, but by improving your fertility and doing everything you can with your healthy diet and lifestyle to reduce the most common complications, you hopefully will be rewarded with an easy delivery and a healthy child who grows up to be a healthy adult. I'll take a little break and a breath. So now we arrive at the longest period of a woman's life, her menopausal years. I'm going to be talking about ages 52 to 92, or maybe 102 if you're lucky. I became plant-based right at this time, and my own symptoms improved as my diet improved. If you had a good start in life, a healthy diet that started even before you were in the womb, a healthy lifestyle without tobacco, excessive alcohol, abusive drugs, excessive stress, if you had supportive relationships with other healthy friends, restful sleep, daily exercise, as well as careful attention to disease prevention and screenings for early detection, this is the time when you will really shine. Even the menopause transition itself will be easier if you're on a low-fat plant-based diet. There was a very interesting study by Dr. Barnard and PCRM called the WAVES study, W-A-V-S, where a group of women with menopausal symptoms were placed on a low-fat, whole-food plant-based diet. They were also overweight and given a half a cup of mature cooked soybeans a day. The control group was on their regular diet. After 12 weeks, the study group on the healthy diet with added phytoestrogens from soybeans had an over 80% drop in severe hot flashes. We know that a plant-based diet will improve your mood and your sexual functioning as well, improving blood flow to the sexual organs with reduced inflammation and endothelial dysfunction, even measurable as clitoral vascular resistance. Of course, you may need vaginal estrogen or lubricants as you get older and your natural estrogen decreases if vaginal penetration is desired or painful, but these are safe to use. I don't want anyone to fear getting older. Aging and dying is inevitable, but suffering from degenerative diseases that we associate with aging in America is not. If you arrive at the conclusion that a plant-based diet would be a good change at the age of 52, as I did, you probably won't see all the benefits that are possible if healthy habits had started earlier. Just take someone like Stefan Esser. You could look him up, his grandfather was promoting a whole food plant-based lifestyle 80 years ago. So when you watch him, you see this kind of exuberant good health. I would want to believe that this kind of good health could be available to more folks if they were only given the knowledge and the access to an abundance of healthy foods, clean water, and a toxin-reduced environment. Here's a list of concerns as women age and conditions which a plant-based gynecologist could always be positively impacting with her guidance regarding the healthiest diet and lifestyle. Dementia and Alzheimer's, type 2 diabetes and kidney failure, macular degeneration, cataracts, breast and uterine cancer, as well as other cancers, cardiovascular disease, still our number one killer, regardless of gender, chronic constipation, diverticular disease, osteoporosis, and autoimmune conditions. Actually, there's a much shorter list of conditions that would not be helped with a plant-based diet. And I really can only think of maybe two. One is tinnitus, and the other is male pattern baldness. There you have it. Most, if not all, of these that I had mentioned before are related to the 4 drivers of disease that we discussed earlier, and all of these should be minimized by reducing chronic inflammation and oxidative stress, by maintaining a healthy weight, by cultivating a healthy and varied gut microbiome, by reducing exposure to many common endocrine disrupting chemicals, by optimizing your preconception health, and always getting sufficient nutrients such as B12, calcium, vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acids, fiber, exercise, and water. Folks always seem to be worried about protein, especially in the more elderly population, maybe 70 and up, with appetites diminished, taste buds not as sharp, and possibly some physical or mental disabilities affecting their diets and their ability to chew. A plant-based diet, if properly supplemented, is still optimal. After age 50, they do recommend slightly more B6. It's a small amount, and it's certainly found in lots of plant-based foods, chickpeas, starchy vegetables, and fortified grains. After the age of 65, Dr. Greger recommends increasing B12 to 1,000 micrograms per day. I know another speaker had said 70, but we recommend 65. At age 50, everyone, not even vegans, but everyone should be taking some extra B12, 1,000 micrograms twice a week or 2,000 micrograms a week. But after age 65, they recommend 1,000 a day. After the age of 50, women need to increase their calcium to 1,200 milligrams a day. And I do recommend keeping, of course, the vitamin D levels normal. For men, they recommend men should increase their calcium to 1,200 milligrams a day after the age of 70. A note about vitamin D levels, we do shoot for adequate levels are 30 to 50 nanograms per ml. That's probably optimal for most. Most people need 2,000 international units a day of extra vitamin D. I mean, it depends where you live. If you live at the equator, you probably wouldn't, but we don't. I'm probably speaking to most of you not living around the equator, so especially in the winter months. The RDA I know is lower than this, but you could just follow 25-hydroxy vitamin D levels and adjust for seasonal sun exposure changes, as well as skin color and obesity. Because I'll tell you, when people have darker skin, they are definitely not absorbing as much of the sun's rays to make vitamin D. And also when they're heavier, they might need even more than 2,000 international units a day. I know what I'm telling you is not in agreement with some of the physicians that you heard today, but I do see patients regularly, and so I have been seeing people with lower vitamin D. It does affect your immune system, and I would just keep them up. Protein should be at least 1 gram per kilogram of ideal body weight, and some people say 1.1 grams per kilogram as you get older. If you're thinking, meaning above 70, if you're thinking about grams per pound of ideal body weight, generally the RDA is 0.36 grams per pound, but for plant eaters, we add a little more to that because plants can be a little harder to digest. So we go up to 0.4 grams per pound. So some say for elderly people, you can increase to 0.45 grams per pound or even 0.5 grams per pound, which is pretty easy, right? And still quite attainable on a healthy whole food plant-based diet, and certainly much less protein than meat eaters get because they don't need that much. So if you take a 135-pound woman, that's 61.2 kilograms. It's 135 times 0.5 is 67.5 grams of protein. The other way is 61.2 kilograms times 1.1 is again 67.32. So not a hard amount of protein to get. And I don't think that you need any kind of supplements unless you're really having trouble digesting some of the heavy hitter plant proteins like legumes. Of course, there's no guarantee of a long and healthy life, but as Kim Williams, past president of the American College of Cardiology, has famously said, I don't mind dying. I just don't want it to be my own fault. So thank you for your time and attention. You can learn more and view additional resources at my website, anewviewoffood.com. You can download my free ebook, Why Eat Plants, and join my mailing list. I hope the information I've shared will help you live a happier, healthier, longer life. If you're planning to become pregnant in the next 6 to 12 months, also check out pregnancyadvantage.net. You can download your free information sheet also. And I am going to be giving a talk about optimizing preconception health at a conference it's called the Best Plant-Based Conference Ever later this fall in Texas, if you happen to be there. And here are some of the sources for my talk. I know you're going to be getting the slides if you bought this. And if you're looking to find a plant-based doctor, you can use that website, plantbaseddocs.com, if you don't already have one. And of course, if you want to have a conversation with me, you can do that through my website, anewviewoffood.com. So I'm ready for questions, and I will stop sharing. Oh, you
All
already.
right. Thank you very much, Dr. Shapiro.
Deborah's fine. Deborah's fine.
I
We're
know.
all friends. It's cool.
I keep doing that to you. I'm
That's
sorry.
okay. Deborah's fine. Dr. Deborah, Deborah's fine. It's okay. I got nothing to prove.
We do have some questions. I was
Great.
trying. Let's see. Did you find Steve Goldman's, Kathleen?
Steve
Yes,
Goldman's
here it is.
is the question about nuts.
And
He's
I'm
a
gonna
person
read the
that
whole
has
thing.
no heart disease, yet it is okay to eat limited amount of nuts, avocado, and soy. If not, why not? And how can I get enough calories in my diet as those currently? Oh, what does it say?
Okay, it's okay. I get it. I get it. I get it.
Great.
Okay. So let me just say, first of all, I appreciate all the speakers that were here today. I love them. I admire them. I almost worship them, right? But I am a doctor that, Dr. Esselstyn is also, but I see a wide range of people. I don't just see people with heart disease. I see a wide range of people, healthy people, generally healthy people. And so I listen to Dr. Greger also. I would recommend that everyone do sign up for nutritionfacts.org and listen to Dr. Greger, because I think he does. I mean, some people argue that he cherry picks, but I don't really think he does. He has all his sources there and you can watch them. The story on nuts, if you look at the blue zones, they eat legumes, they eat nuts. The healthiest people in the world eat nuts. There's nothing, when they've done studies looking at nuts and longevity, they're right there. So I guess you could always say, are nuts healthy compared to what? You can always say compared to what, right? I think that's a good way of looking at it. Are nuts better than black beans? I don't know. I mean, they have a different nutrient profile. I think you should eat from all the food groups, and nuts and seeds are there, especially things like ground flax. You should be having a tablespoon or two of ground flax every single day. That the lignans in flax, that kind of fiber, will help to take out extra hormones so that you're less likely to get things like breast cancer or prostate cancer if you're a man or male to female transgender. So I'm not anti-nut at all. As a matter of fact, there have been studies even when people were given some nuts at night to eat, and you don't even absorb all the calories from nuts because, you chomp, 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 and you swallow it. So it's probably better to have nuts than to have nut butter, where you would absorb more of the fat from the nut butter. So I think it's very reasonable. If you look at Dr. Greger's daily dozen, he has a tablespoon of seeds. And again, the variety of seeds, we talked earlier about zinc from pumpkin seeds. And, I get actually some breakouts from sunflower seeds, but a lot of people can tolerate them. So I wouldn't ignore anything. And the nuts, walnuts are one of the sources of omega-3 fatty acids. There are only 4: ground flax, ground chia, hemp seeds, and walnuts. So if you want to get your omega-3s, I know there are people, even Chef AJ, no nuts, no seeds, because she sees them as kind of a slippery slope, right? They are addictive. If you buy one, you go to Costco and you get don't let me sit on, I only sit on my hands. If you go to Costco and you buy some huge amount of raw cashews and you just open it up and start chomping at them, and you can't stop because they're addictive. It's true. It's true. If you are a food addict and you cannot stop at just a handful of nuts, then maybe it's better not to have them. But if you can, limit yourself to a handful of nuts or even a combination of different nuts. Listen, there's some amazing nuts. If you have 4 Brazil nuts once a month, which is great for selenium too. If you have 4 Brazil nuts, you'll actually lower your LDLs. And that effect lasts even a month. I wouldn't have 4 a day because you'll be too much selenium. But you can definitely have 4 once a month, or you can have 1 a week or a couple a week. So I think nuts are healthful, and avocado actually has been shown to decrease LDL cholesterol. If you're obese and the point is that you need to reduce your calories, then just remember vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and legumes are all equal to or less than 600 calories a pound. So that's maybe where you want to put most of your attention to. Fruits, vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and legumes. But if the point is not that you have to limit, or in your case, I think you're even worried about getting enough calories, then I think you have to expand a little bit. And certainly I don't think anyone has proven that you have to eliminate that tablespoon or 2 of ground flax and a tablespoon or so, I'm sorry, a handful or so, an ounce or so of nuts. That is me.
Okay. Another person wants to know that they have a high blood pressure of 1,150 systolic. And when I have,
I think it was
and
150. I saw the
I'm
question
sorry.
earlier.
Oh yeah, 150.
Yes,
And on a plant-based diet, 80
right,
years old. 80
right.
years old.
Okay, okay. When you said a plant-based diet, I didn't hear that you were no salt.
Yeah.
That's what I would wonder about, and I'm happy to talk to you about it offline. I'm not your doctor, so I can't really say what might be going on with your blood vessels that you have that kind of blood pressure. But you might want to take a look at the foods that you're eating. If you really are eating an entirely whole food plant-based diet with nothing processed and no added sodium, then maybe you want to do something that might reduce your blood pressure, like drink. There's a tea that reduces blood pressure. Linda, what is it? Wasn't thinking about it for a second. I'll come back to it, but there may be something you can do to lower your blood pressure that way.
Okay. And what about nail polish and hair dyes?
Yeah, right. What about those? You know, what I would do is I would look at the environmental working group, and I would also look at Momavation about nail polish. I think there are some nail polishes that might be lower in chemicals that would be bad for you. I was just reading something about those gels. I think they're awful. So I used to dye my hair and made excuses for it. Like we all make excuses for things that we still do that we don't want to give up. So when I got to a certain age, and I guess it was the pandemic that really made me rethink it. And then I started learning more about these chemicals, and I'm glad I'm doing it. But all the new stuff that's coming out about the hair straighteners in the African American or the Black population is really just terrifying.
Yeah, sounds like it. Also, what about women with the BRCA gene?
Right. So what is the BRCA mutation? So the BRCA gene, this has to do with DNA repair. There are lots of DNA repair genes. And when we were talking about this idea of epigenetics, we're not really changing the gene, but we're changing the gene expression. We're turning it on and we're turning it off. So there can be actually probably even, I don't know whether a BRCA mutation would actually be a mutation in that gene so that it's not expressed. So you're losing that ability to do a certain kind of a repair. So more likely to get certain kinds of cancers early in life, breast and ovarian, depending on what type you might have. Well, what's interesting is that one of the ways that soy phytoestrogen works is actually to upregulate some of these DNA repair genes. And that's why they say that even if you have a BRCA mutation and you're more likely to get a breast and or ovarian cancer, that having more soy phytoestrogens, and I'm not talking about like taking soy phytoestrogen as a supplement. Again, I'm just saying eat whole soy foods, organic. You don't want the GMO soy. You just want that's loaded with glyphosate. You really need nowadays to get organic, non-GMO foods. So whole soy foods like soybeans, whole soybeans, edamame, which is the young soybean, soy milk, meat, slightly processed, so tofu, tempeh, things like that, to give you the soy phytoestrogens that are actually going to upregulate the DNA repair genes and work in a lot of other ways too. To like acting like an aromatase inhibitor, acting like a SERM, like a selective estrogen receptor modulator, like tamoxifen, to actually put a brake on growth in the breast tissue instead of accelerating it like our own endogenous estrogen does, and the way these endocrine disrupting chemicals do as well.
And what advice do you give to a 10-year-old whole food plant-based couple experiencing infertility with 2 miscarriages? And it just went away. With 2 miscarriages who've had all fertility tests and exams with known causes except ANA positive.
ANA?
Yeah.
So they have an autoimmune condition?
And they didn't have that test.
Okay. I think this is a very specific question about and that since I'm not their doctor,
Yeah.
I don't really know everything. I'm not sure. You're saying that they're already, so if people are already on a whole food plant-based diet
Mhm.
and they have an optimal weight
Mhm.
and they've eliminated, let me give you another website that they might want to check into, because this whole idea of these endocrine disrupting chemicals might actually be playing a role, and it's possible that they're not even aware of how contaminated things might be. I don't know if this is, but it's called, let me find it for a second. Jenna Hua has an organization, millionmarker.com. So look up millionmarker.com, that you can actually send your urine off to them. They will evaluate for parabens and phthalates and other important chemicals. They'll look at, you can then give them a list of everything that you're using, and they can help to eliminate it. So maybe that's something that's going on that you're not even aware of. So millionmarker.com, Jenna Hua.
Okay, thank you. Are there bad chemicals in pads like Kotex? And
Yeah, I think there
what
are.
do you do?
So
What do you
yes.
do?
Well, there might be some that are less. It's, because I'm so old. I haven't been thinking about it that long. But if you look at mamavation.com, she has a whole thing on, even on, amazingly, on yoga pants. There's PFAS, PFAS, perfluoro and per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, in yoga pants. So she has a whole expose on all of this. It's very well respected, that website, and I would recommend that you look at that and see what brands she's recommending.
Thank you. And what can you do to prevent ulcers?
Yes, you poor person has been asking every single person. I'm so sorry. To prevent ulcers. Are you talking about stomach ulcers? There is a bacteria that's involved with ulcers, and that can be tested for. So it's called H. pylori. You probably already had that tested, but if you have H. pylori, there might be something that you can do to get rid of it. It is less likely on a plant-based diet. Stress is probably involved. It has to do with acid secretion. So I think a really good gastroenterologist would be the person to see.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Is elderberry is nice for menopausal women?
Elderberry. I actually don't know anything about elderberry,
Okay.
and for menopausal symptoms.
Okay.
I've done black cohosh, which has helped. Some people people feel that soy or even soy phytoestrogens help. Elderberry, I don't know if it works for you. There's a 30%, 35%, placebo effect. Go for it.
And Lori asked, what about oxalate overload? Is that a legitimate concern?
Oxalates. Oxalates. So oxalates are chemicals that can be considered sort of anti-nutrient in a way. They impair the absorption of other minerals. And this is why you don't try to eat undercooked beans, and why we really recommend soaking them and making sure that they're very soft. And oxalates and lectins are found in grains and legumes, and that's why we cook them or sprout them and cook them. And it's interesting about oxalates because there's a tea that's very popular right now, and it's a mushroom, right? It's chaga. And I remember once trying to give some mushroom tea that I had found. I was so excited about these different mushroom teas to Dr. Greger at an event, and he looked very carefully at them all, and he took some of them, and he wouldn't take the one that had chaga in it because he said it's too high in oxalates. And also, of course, it is possible and very common actually to have kidney stones, especially if you're not on a whole food plant-based diet, but to have kidney stones that are made out of calcium oxalates. So in those cases, when people make stones, if you make stones that have oxalates in them, then you really need to be on a lower oxalate diet. And actually 3 of my siblings have calcium oxalate stones. So I've been hearing a lot about this. So oxalates are found in in certain greens. And if you need to stay away from these, then here they are. They are spinach, beet greens, and chard. Those are the ones that are high in oxalates. And so if you do tend to make stones, then you'd want to minimize those. So I think that's,
Okay,
you can
thank
definitely please look also. I'm not a dietitian. I'm just a doctor. So you can always look at nutritionfacts.org because you can learn a lot more about oxalates there.
And then also, what was the name of the yoga place? Paz and
Mamavation.com. MAMAVATION, mamavation.com.
Thank you. And how often do you recommend pap smears to menopausal women who are not sexually active? Does she recommend mammograms? If so, how often?
Good questions. Okay. So the story about pap smears has been changing a lot. And I think now we start at 21 and we go to about 65. That's what the ASCCP guidelines are, American Society for Colposcopy and Cervical Pathology. And you can stop at 65 if you've had a few normal PAPs before that. The amount every 3 years until 30, every 5 years after that with HPV co-testing, if you're very low risk, or you can do HPV testing alone. That being said, your risk of cervical cancer goes up as you age, and I have certainly found abnormal PAPs and dysplasia in women who are older. So that is something that you can decide with your clinician. If you've been monogamous or you've not had sex with anyone and you've always had normal PAPs, I think there's no problem probably in stopping at 65. But if you're having multiple sex partners or you've had a dysplasia in the past, all that goes out the window, right? If you had high-grade dysplasia at some point, they say every year for 20 years. So there's a wonderful app called the ASCCP app, and we use that to help determine risk of high-grade dysplasia, and that's how we decide how often we should do PAPs or when we should stop doing PAPs. Mammograms, certainly very controversial. I remember almost a decade ago when I went to my first conference, plant-based nutrition conference, and someone was talking about not getting mammograms anymore, and I thought, it was just heresy. And since then, I've learned a lot more about it and about looking at risk versus benefit. And there's some very interesting data about it. On the other hand, I have also heard about very conscientious, low-fat, lean vegans with no family history who are young and got breast cancer. So, and I even know there's a wonderful, wonderful plant-based doctor named Christy Funk who wrote a book called Breasts, an Owner's Manual. It's a great book. She's not anti-mammogram. She's really not. So yes, we don't tell women to check their breasts methodically every month. That's true. We don't want women to freak out. Your decision about when to get a mammogram is something that you need to make thinking about your risk and your need to know and your relationship with your doctor and your clinician, and you can make that decision. You can start at 40 or 45 or 50 if you want. You can get it every year, every 1 to 2 years between 40 and 50, every year after 50, or not. It's up to you. It's really up to you. Can you stop at 65? I don't know. Maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't. I don't know. It's up to you. It's up to you. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right. Thank you so much. That was our last question. Okay. And thank you so much, Dr. Shapiro. It was fabulous. Everybody learned so much. And it's an honor to have you here. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.